to the committee yet.
Let me check with the clerk, excuse me. The clerk will check on that, and hopefully we can have an answer before the end of the meeting to that question, or perhaps at the end of the meeting. So, colleagues, before us today we have His Excellency Ambassador Dominic Barton, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Canada to the People's Republic of China, and with him from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development is Mr. Sean Stile, excuse me, Executive Director, Greater China. Ambassador, you'll have 20 minutes for your opening statement, followed, of course, by questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I know you're taking on very important work, and I'm very honored to be able to come and talk to you today. I want to spend just 2 minutes on the coronavirus. I know the minister's already talked a lot about it, but just to say that we have 373 Canadians who are seeking assistance to leave Hubei province. 211 are on the flight manifest, which should be leaving tomorrow at about noon, weather and all of that stuff being in our favor. And then we're looking at other options, whether it relates to other countries' planes or having our own plane coming in. But we've got 8 consular people on the ground because there's a lot of complications in moving people. And we also have set up a call center in the Beijing embassy just to, if people have a lot of questions about getting water and food and so forth in that environment. So I'm happy to talk more about that. The other comment I would just make is that the Government of Canada, working through the Canadian Red Cross, has also provided protective medical equipment to China, and that was sent yesterday. They're en route and will be heading right to Hubei. And I would just echo what's been said in the World Health Organization that I commend what China's doing in trying to contain this, just the effort that's underway on that front. In September last year, Prime Minister Trudeau appointed me as ambassador. I've basically been in the role for about 4.5 months. I was in Beijing at the end of September when actually the Chinese ambassador on the same day came, the new Chinese ambassador came here. As you, I think, well know, my career has been in the private sector all the way through, but I'm honored to be able to be given the opportunity to serve my country, and that's to promote and defend Canada's interests and values. I hope it's to also help China better understand Canada and Canadians to better understand China. I want to say also the utmost priority of my goal and objectives is to work for the release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and to seek clemency for Robert Schellenberg. That's right in the headlights, and I think about that every day. In December 2018, Canada's relations with China fundamentally changed, and that was following the arrest of Madame Meng. We can talk about all the consequent acts, but there was a massive change. Things had been actually moving quite well. The chill is real. I'm committed to working hard to resolve the challenges that we face in that bilateral relationship, to try and restore our relationship, but critical to that will be the release of the 2 Michaels and clemency for Michael Kovrig. The Chinese side is also very angry about where they are, so we've lots to work through. Resuming regular high-level dialogue between our governments and strengthening our channels of communication, which again had been broken, are key early aspects of what I've been trying to do in China. And although we've had some success in this regard, many of our regular dialogues, especially the ministerial ones, have not resumed since December 2018. I want to just say a little bit about my background. I lived in China for 6 years, and I was based in Shanghai, working around the country. I've been in Asia for about 12 years, and then I've had sort of consistent engagement with China. It's actually been mainly with the university sector and some cities. That's been my primary area of interest. I definitely do not pretend to have the answers to all of the issues in the complex, diverse relationship, but will try and do my best to just give you my lens as to how I see it and what we're up to. More specifically, there were four things I wanted to cover quickly. One, a bit of the context on what's happening in China. Two, the nature of our relationship today. Three, our current presence, what that looks like. And then probably most importantly, talk about my mandate and the priorities that the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs are asking me to pursue. So first on the context, and I know you don't need lots of stories about how big China is and how important it is and so forth. I think you well know that. All I would say is that I think we've seen over the last 15 years, and it's accelerating, an economic power shift towards Asia and a geopolitical shift towards Asia, with China very much at the center. 28 to 30% of global GDP growth is coming from China, and while that's going to be affected by the coronavirus, it's going to be back. It's the second largest consumer market in the world, the largest protein market in the world for meats, but also for vegetable-based proteins. That's a very important market for us. As we look at it, the largest energy market in the world, particularly as it relates to renewables, and I could go on that side. We are not very relevant in that market. China imports about $2.1 trillion. That was the 2018 numbers. We have about 1.3% of that. Over the last 25 years, we've lost share in that. We've been growing, which is great, but we've been losing share as we go through it. In terms of I sort of look at China as 22 clusters of city. It's just too big to look as one country. Canada's probably relevant in 3 of those 22 clusters and where we are. So we've got there's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity for us as we look ahead. And I believe that this growth will continue with the urbanization and the push to the service sector as we go through it. Understanding the history and culture, I think, is critically important. I'm not about to try and talk in detail about that. I just want to register it, because in the 3,000 plus years of history, you can learn a lot about how China thinks about priorities, how they make decisions and values as they go through it. And for example, just on the values side, I think it's important to understand, and it's not to say that we agree with it, because we have a different point of view, but understand where they're coming from. They place an importance on the values of collectivism and harmony, which is owing to a Confucian heritage, and understanding the extent to which China values unity and needs of society at large rather than freedom of individual choice. We just have to understand that. That's where they're coming from, and can help us understand the trade-offs they make. It does not mean that we agree with what they do and where they are. It's about understanding, and you can see that in history. While I talked about all of the growth and the opportunities and so forth in China, they face very significant challenges. They have a huge issue going on poverty. There is a very poor part of China. It's a rich and poor country. That's a very big focus of the government, of eradicating poverty. They have millions that are still below the international poverty line. Environment is a big push for them. It's the world's second. China has the world's second highest number of pollution-related deaths after India. There's a lot of improvement, but a lot of work that needs to be done. Their demographics, it is a very rapidly aging society like Canada, but obviously on a different scale. There's about 260 million people over the age of 60. I don't think it's that old, but that's getting older. That's going to go up to 483 million. That has huge impact on productivity, on healthcare costs and lifestyle. And Canada has a lot of capability on that side, on the research and many other dimensions. Their investment efficiency is dropping. It takes double the amount of investment to get a single unit of output, which has put challenges in terms of their growth model. And their financial system, which is now, by many respects, the second largest in the world, they now have to worry more about stability, and I think Canada can provide a lot. So they've got lots of big issues that they have to work on, besides obviously pandemics and so forth that come up. So just understand the challenges. Our relationship, the history of our relationship is actually quite unique. They remind me of that almost every time I see someone senior, and they're serious about it. They go back to actually missionaries who were in China in the 1870s and 90s in places like Chengdu and Chongqing, that established schools, that established hospitals, and they're revered to this day. They used to not talk about missionaries. You can now talk about missionaries, and I'd say it's a large part to what Canadian missionaries had done. Norman Bethune, everyone probably knows about Norman Bethune and the role that he played as a doctor helping Chinese soldiers in World War II. He is completely, an icon, and to the younger generation today. Our support for Hong Kong during World War II, 554 Canadians died trying to defend Hong Kong, 500 Canadians being wounded. That is remembered every year as an effort, a joint effort in trying to fight fascism. Our wheat sales that we did in 1958 all the way into the 60s against a view in the world that where people wanted to isolate communist China, we provided wheat, and then our diplomatic recognition in 1970, almost a decade before China. They remember that. That all said, it's nice to have a history, but there are limits to what that gets in terms of influence. And I'm going to come back to this because I believe that we need to have influence, but to be having influence means you have to have some relevance in the system. And so there's only so far that those historical links can get us there. Our presence in China, I'm not going to go into the detail. These are just facts, but we have roughly 650 people in Greater China. 150 of those are Canadian-based staff, and about 500 are locally engaged staff, which we shouldn't forget. We have obviously the embassy in Beijing, but also consulate generals in Chongqing, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. And then we have a secondary network of trade missions in 10 cities that are spread across the country. And then there's the provincial level involvement that goes on from provinces, which is very important, and actually some municipal linkages. And those ties are actually very important, especially when we have challenges like this. Having wires that are not just at a national level help allow dialogue in what we're doing. So just getting to my mandate and priorities in discussions with the Prime Minister and then the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The overall objective is restore the relationship, but with three priorities, and I would argue one very important caveat that's in that. First and foremost, secure the release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor and get clemency for Robert Schellenberg. That is core. That's a priority. Second, promote and protect human rights. That is a sine qua non. It has to be in everywhere. It's not something you put to the side while you do it. I want it in the headlights of what you do. And then third, look at how you can deepen and broaden the relationship, and that's the people-to-people ties. So it's not just the government ties, it's the arts, it's the sports, it's the universities. There's lots of other wires and linkages in there. And then it is the economic ties, because there are significant opportunities in many sectors, but particularly in 5 to 6. So these are the keys to resolving this bilateral tension and restoring trust. I think Canadians want to engage, but on the basis of doing it with international rules and principles that provide predictability and security. So that's what I'm trying to do. What I will say, which in the dark periods of where it's a very tough discussion, when I was presenting my letters of credence to President Xi, and I mentioned to him, I told him what my priorities were. He said, in restoring a relationship like this, it takes two sides to do that. There's things you need to do, and there's things we need to do. And so there's a lot of work clearly there. The bilateral tensions and the first priority around the safe and timely return to Canada of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, and securing clemency for Robert Schellenberg, and by the way, all the death penalty cases like we do in other countries. Well, I'm limited by privacy and to what I can say. I've seen each of them a number of times as I've gone through it. The comment I would just want to make, and I'm not used to doing this type of thing, is I am unbelievably inspired by their resilience. Each of these three people, it's incredible as humans and as individuals. I want to say that, and that's how I mark my time in China, is my visits that I do. It's not usual for ambassadors. They typically will do one. I'm going to go every single time I'm allowed to go and visit. I and we consistently, constructively engage with the Chinese government on their cases, and I hope that our efforts are soon going to bear fruit. We'll have to try all different means. We're working closely with other governments, particularly the United States, but also like-minded partners to work together to try and unlock this, but also to maintain awareness of the issues, as this also impacts other countries. I know this continues to be top of mind for the Prime Minister, and is a reason why he has repeatedly said Canada will only respond to this situation in a manner that upholds our values and respect for the rule of law. My discussions with fellow ambassadors in Beijing have given me insights into what other countries have gone through, because others have gone through this and experienced significant strains in their relationship, and I'm happy to talk more on that. But again, resolving this issue is critical for us to be able to move to a restored relationship with China. Promoting and protecting human rights, something that is extremely important and is emphasized to me all the time by the Prime Minister, that be reinforced no matter what position we are in. As I mentioned, when it comes to values, we have different views on that. That said, we believe that human rights are universal and inalienable, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. And this is why we believe it's important to hold the Chinese government accountable, as we do all governments, to these principles and its own international and domestic commitments. For example, our government has expressed deep concern over time with China's human rights record, particularly recently in the province of Xinjiang, but also in other parts of the country. Journalists, diplomats, and Chinese civil society representatives I have spoken to agree that 2019 witnessed an increased crackdown on dissent and on expressions of disagreement about China's human rights record within and outside the country. The Government of Canada is concerned that China's crackdown on dissent is increasingly extending beyond China's own borders. So whether it's in international fora such as the UN or domestically, Canada continues to emphasize the value of universal human rights as defined by the United Nations. As I mentioned, our government is concerned by the credible reports of the mass detention, repressive surveillance, and family separation affecting Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang under the pretext of countering extremism, terrorism, and separatism. As ambassador, I will continue to raise these issues with Chinese authorities, which I have done, to release Uyghurs and other Muslims who've been detained arbitrarily. Canadians are also becoming more worried about how all of this touches them. I see the opinion polls that are out there. So charting a way forward in our relations with China has to ensure that we're following the rules and norms of engagement that we all respect. Deepening and broadening the relationship. We do have frank, difficult discussions with the Chinese government. They do that with us because they're also very concerned with us. But China is more than about government. There are many, many other different relationships that are going on in the country. And so it's very important that we deepen and broaden those. They help with resilience, and they also help with strengthening the relationship. And there's three areas in particular we've been looking at. One is fabric. That's, the people-to-people ties. And that's everything, again, from arts, education, business, communities just linking up together. One example I'd give you is when I've had conversations with party secretaries in cities, and they've been very icy at the beginning, and then you have one glass of baijiu, and you find out that the party secretary's son or daughter has gone to Western or McGill, and they're very proud of that linkage. There's a linkage that's in the system that people know in Canada. And our alumni that are in China that have gone to Canadian universities is I think, an underutilized asset that we have. Promoting trade and investment, I would love to talk more. I probably should shut up and move on, but I'm very excited by the opportunity that we have on many fronts. And I also think we need to build our China competencies more, given the significance of China over the next 100 years. And whether you like China or don't like China, it is going to play a very important role. And we need to build our capabilities, not just in the government side, but also in our communities and with our children, to understand how this system works and where it is. So in conclusion, I would just say that obviously none of this is easy or straightforward. There's a new adventure almost every week in this. As a country, we need to digest this complexity and the significance of China and how it impacts our interests. In the short term, this means defining our Canadian interests very clearly and identifying where these interests are also shared by China so we can work together on common objectives. And there is a large common objective agenda that we can work on together. And it also means identifying our red lines where compromise is not possible. Friends disagree with each other. Friends get mad at each other. So we need to define where those are and make sure people understand it. And we need to manage both these opportunities and challenges in concert. It's a notion of walking and chewing gum at the same time. We can engage and grow, and we can also be tough at the same time. Again, to be able to do this at the beginning, we need to resolve the current bilateral challenges in securing the release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor and gaining clemency for Robert Schellenberg. I don't think we're alone in this challenge. Many countries are facing this. I just hope we take a long-term approach in how we do it and don't bounce around over time. We need a long-term approach. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Our first questioner today, Mr. Jennis.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I do want to say at the outset, with greatest respect, that I felt at the time of your appointment and still feel that you are a completely inappropriate choice as ambassador. And that's not because of your personal qualifications, but it's because, as you said today, we expect our diplomatic corps to defend our interests and our values. And I look at the track record with McKinsey and some of the things that McKinsey was involved in, and those raise big red flags for me in terms of your position as now being the representative of Canada defending our interests and our values. At the time you were in charge of McKinsey, from 2009 to 2018, it's my understanding that you advised almost 24 Chinese state-owned companies. According to the New York Times, one of those companies was the China Communications Construction Company. Could you confirm for me, first of all, that McKinsey did work for the China Communications Construction Company while you were there?
I'd have to check that out, but I'm happy to agree to that if that's you read it in the New York Times.
Yeah. Would you be prepared to submit to this committee a list of all of the Chinese state-owned companies that you did work for at McKinsey?
What I would, Mr. Chair, what I would need to do is McKinsey's pretty careful about client confidentialities and where they are. I'd be happy for if there was some mechanism so it isn't in the public domain, but some people can look at it. I'm open to that. What I would remark, though, is that first of all, I'd say I'm very proud of my career and time in the private sector and with McKinsey and the work that we did. That firm has worked with many companies around the world. We're known for telling truth to power and calling it out as it is. So,
okay, you're proud of that, and we know that, and that's important. I think that's on the record. When you signed on to the China Communications Construction Company, when you signed them as a client in 2015. They were still under World Bank sanctions because of corruption and bid rigging they engaged in the Philippines. Would you have been aware that they were under sanctions when you signed them on as a client?
Mr. Chair, what I would say is that McKinsey has over 3,000 clients we work with. I'm not familiar with that at all. I wasn't involved. I wasn't doing any client work. I was based in London at the time. I'm not looking at that. So I'm just not familiar with the details of that.
Okay. You were in charge of McKinsey, though, and you were setting, I assume, broad policy direction. Like, for example, you were involved in, McKinsey was advising a company that was carrying out the Chinese government's policy of building islands militarized islands in the South China Sea. Is it your position that those islands are a violation of international law?
Mr. Chair, what I would say with that is I am not familiar at all with us being involved in designing the islands in the South China Sea. If you want to talk to someone at McKinsey to find out more information, I'm sure we'd be happy to get someone to talk to you about it. But
Okay. Let me just back up a second then. In terms of your position now, do you agree with the Permanent Court of Arbitration's ruling that China's program of the construction of militarized islands in the South China Sea violates international law? Do you agree with that?
I would follow the policy of what the government does. I think the Canadian government respects international opinions, but we don't have a view on maritime issues. So I'd have to look at what our policy is on that. I don't.
Okay, but you're Canada's ambassador to China, so you're a spokesman for our policy on China, and it's your job to communicate that policy to Canadians and to the Chinese government. So if you were asked in a meeting with a Chinese official if our view was consistent with the Hague's tribunal's view, would you agree, yes, that the tribunal was right, that these islands violate international law?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what I would do in that is I wouldn't make up an answer. I would actually go and look to see what we do. I mean, what I see here is that, I would probably say, let me get back to you on it because I'm not familiar with all of the pieces. Canada opposes unilateral actions that escalate tensions and undermine stability in the international order. So
it's a simple policy question. It's interesting that you're sort of not briefed on the answer to what is. I think everybody around this table knows what's happening in the South China Sea, that it's a violation of international law. And you may not remember, but your company was involved in advising the China Communications Construction Company at a time when they were working on this very project in violation of international
Mr. Chair,
law.
can I just interject for a second? I said there's a very different point when you make that the company was involved while this was happening doesn't mean that McKinsey was advising that. So you need to
Charge
find out
of the
more.
company, sir. It's like when the Prime Minister says that, oh, I didn't do it, it was a functionary in the bureaucracy. The buck has to stop somewhere. And you were running the company. So you were setting the policy direction. And it wasn't just in China, it wasn't just state-owned companies. It was, you know of the case in Saudi Arabia where a report that was prepared identifying critics of the Saudi government led to them being punished in a crackdown. There are so many different cases when you were in the leadership of McKinsey of just gross problems in terms of cooperation with gross abusers of human rights. And your response to these questions is to say you don't know, you don't remember, and you weren't responsible when you were the guy running the show. That doesn't give me a lot of confidence that you running the show as ambassador. Thank you.
I'm sorry, we've exceeded your time. And Ambassador, I'm afraid you'll have to wait for another opportunity if you wish to respond to that. We're on to Mr. Fragis-Katas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ambassador, for being here. In 2015, you co-authored a piece for the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, and there was a quote that stood out for me. In fact, it mirrors what we heard in your comments in many ways, but I'll read it to you. The world is rebalancing towards Asia, and China in particular. Canada must rebalance with it. Can you highlight for us the importance of this relationship? I know you've taken time to do that in your opening statement, but this is a fundamental relationship for Canada now and in the future. Could you, at least that's my view, and I think the view of most people in this country.
Yeah.
Expand on that.
Sure. Well, I think that, Canada is a small trading nation. We're a G7 country, but we depend on trade, and we depend on trading with large markets. And one of the absolute largest markets in the world is China, and it's going to become the largest market. And so for Canada's future prosperity, I think it's very important that we be there. And the thing that I find most exciting about it is that there is a neat overlap in terms of what we have, and that's not just the natural resources, which is obviously an important area, and we could do more with that, but it's also with our brain power, right, and our regulatory approaches and our financial services, and I could go on. So there's a neat overlap. And this will create many jobs. It will allow Canadians with ideas and innovative thoughts to be able to expand them into bigger markets. And it's something that the whole country can participate in. So again, China needs a lot of things that we have, and I think we could play an even more influential role in terms of how that economy and society evolves.
Can I ask you, Ambassador, and I acknowledge everything that you've said, but we are, I think the word you used in your statement was chill. We are in a very difficult moment in the relationship. Do you have any thoughts on what's worked and what hasn't when other states have had challenges with China? Any lessons learned that can be applied, particularly the experience of liberal democracies, I think, would stand out and be quite appropriate. Anything that we can learn as a lesson from that and apply to the current situation?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I spent a lot of time with ambassadors from other countries who've gone through this. You think about Norway, Japan, Singapore. I can go on, and I think there are a couple of lessons learned. I think one is not to be bullied, is to stand up for what we believe in and where we are and what we're going to do. Number two is to maintain a long-term perspective, to think about the broader relationship, to continue to engage. There are a number of cases where the engagement stopped and it took a long, long time to get back. And the lesson learned from talking with that ambassador and with the government there is they would have continued to engage. So I think it's being clear about what you want to do. It's continuing to engage and build and look for relationships, to engage others to help you in that process. Those would be a couple of things I would suggest.
Okay, and on that point about engagement, there are those who have called for, not just politicians. If you read the Globe and Mail, for example, there's been a number of op-eds calling for a much more confrontational approach. But you've pointed to the need to continue to engage Beijing and the fact that, as you've highlighted here today, positives can come out of engagement. Can you talk about how that could help strengthen the current, help overcome the current impasse that we're in?
Yeah, I think again that I think it is important to engage because you I remember this clearly from talking to Singaporeans. You have to have some relevance to be able to get things done and where you are, and it's not just the economic relevance; it's the trust and linkages that people actually have built in what they're doing, and so I think it's important to do that. The other thing I would suggest, and again, there are different views. I know there are views about let's go hardline, let's cut everything off. You know, the question there, I think, is just be prepared for what you ask for in that type of an approach. And I don't think we have to go that way. I think there's a lot of reasonable people to be able to interact with in it, and so that's why I think it's again what I've learned and heard from other countries that are going through similar processes is engagement is important.
And that is not to the exclusion of human rights, then?
Absolutely not. I think you can, as I said, you could be very strict and strong in terms of how you feel and say it. And some might say, we're in the freezer box in terms of our linkage. Why would you even say anything? I think that's exactly the time to say it. We're not going to stop. It's there, and I think that's important. Just again because when we re-engage, we want to make sure we're re-engaging in the right way for the long term, and that's something the Prime Minister feels very strongly about.
25 seconds.
5 seconds. Well, you talked about common objectives where we can work together. I quoted directly from your opening statement. Should there be another round, I'd like to ask you more about that. I think that's really important to emphasize, not to minimize at all the current challenges that we're facing. Of course, there's Mr. Cover, there's Mr. Spavor that are facing difficulties and their families are concerned, as are Canadians, but we have to keep in mind also the importance of the relationship as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiskatos. Mr. Bergeron.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, Excellency, thank you for being here with us today. Since you said at the outset, every time the opportunity presented itself, you met Canadian citizens who are currently incarcerated. Please send them our thoughts. The members of this committee, all the members of this committee, are deeply concerned about what has happened to them. And I would be very grateful if you could please communicate our solidarity with them regarding the situation they are currently in. Mr. Chair, I'm not going to hide the unease that I feel with the turn of this committee's work. It seems to me, quite honestly, that the worst thing to do under the current circumstances is to undermine the credibility of the person who is representing Canada before Chinese authorities. On the contrary, I think that your experience, the work that you have done up until now, makes you very qualified for the delicate mission that has been given to you. From the very moment where you were appointed, the descending spiral of the relationship between Canada and China stopped. And relatively quickly, we were able to reestablish pork exports towards China. Some will say that they had no choice in any case, because national production with swine flu did not meet demand. However, it remains that there was a change in attitude. What I know is that those visits that you conduct with Canadians who are incarcerated have a very positive effect. I would like to thank you for those. However, this leads me to my question. Since your presence, beyond the quality of your experience, the quality of what you know about the dynamics of Chinese culture, the effects that I've just described, are they not the tangible evidence that the Government of Canada should have acted much faster to appoint an ambassador to Beijing rather than wait 8 months during this long crisis before filling that position?
Mr. Chair, thanks for the comments and the questions. It's much appreciated, and I will definitely pass on the remarks to Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig, and also to Robert Schellenberg on that. That means a lot to hear that this committee is here and how people feel about that. On the question of appointing an ambassador, I think I wasn't part of the process. What I would say is that I think the fact that both ambassadors were appointed at the same time, it's a small step. It was a signal that we wanted to be able to move forward. What I would say is that this chill in the relationship, I mean, we're angry. We're very angry because of our people that have been taken. China's very angry as well about the furious, right? So we're both furious. And so I'll just say that the first conversation I had there was probably one of the most unpleasant conversations I've ever had. I mean, the shaking and anger from there, and we were also. So it wasn't a conversation. It was a two-way like reading of things, and so I think the dynamic was such that it was just, I think the government was trying to reach out. There wasn't any response, right, in terms of where things were. So it wasn't even a basis to have a discussion, and it was really in Osaka where the prime minister, because of alphabetical order, was sitting beside the president to say we've got to get through this and where it is. But I hope now that we do actually have some channels, and we can now have real conversations where we can interrupt each other. We can not just be angry, but we can actually try and be constructive. So, sorry.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous aurons...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will eventually have the opportunity to come back on the sequence that led to the arrest of Meng Wanzhou and the consequences that led to for Canadian citizens. I'm sure we'll get back to that. However, 2 questions. The first, to your knowledge, before making the decision to authorize the incarceration of Meng Wanzhou, were there consultations with the ambassador, or the embassy rather? And given the similar case of the couple, the Garrett couple in 2014, should we not have been aware of what could have happened?
I think that, Mr. Chair, on that one, I'm not aware of the actual conversations. I think Justice has come through to sort of explain the process yesterday before and how the process worked. But I wasn't part of those discussions and where it was, so I wouldn't be able to answer that.
Yeah, but from what you know,
Monsieur Bergeron, peut-être on pourrait poursuivre.
Mr. Bergeron, you might be able to re-ask your question later because you're currently out of time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Barton, for your opening remarks. I want to echo Mr. Bergeron's comments about and acknowledge your extraordinary efforts on a personal level in personally visiting the Messrs. Kovrig, Spavor, and Schellenberg and offering them your support. I think it is very meaningful, and I've heard words to that effect. So thank you for doing that. You were appointed, of course, and I want to go into the effectiveness of some of the efforts internationally, and I think we may have a second round, Mr. Chair. I hope we will, to do some of that. But you were appointed only recently in the middle of an election. You haven't appeared before a committee before, and this is sort of the first opportunity for us to listen to you and also to raise some things that have been raised in the public domain, which I'm sure you're aware of. As late as today, we had a release from Democracy Watch suggesting that your holdings and your history and your current holdings and that of your wife and her involvement in investments in the Asia Pacific gives rise to a conflict of interest. Now, I don't want to get into blind trusts and any of those things because these are detailed and potentially, lead to a big discussion. But I just do want to ask you this question because I think Canadians deserve an answer. What do you say to Canadians as to whether they should feel comfortable with you in this role, given the fact that it's been suggested that these involvements would lead you to open to be in influence, given the suggestion that perhaps consciously or unconsciously your own approach and attitude in dealing with the Chinese and the issues may be influenced by your personal interests. What do you say to Canadians about that criticism and that allegation? I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first thing I would say is that my integrity matters a lot to me. It matters a huge amount to me. So what people say or say I'm doing, and I've lived my life in the highest integrity. So at a personal level, I'd say that. And there's a track record of people I've interacted with, worked with on that. The second is that I've been extraordinarily diligent with the Conflict and Ethics Commissioner from the very beginning. Before this even happened, I said, I have my wife. I'm proud that she works. This is the situation you need to be aware of. I was very transparent about any of the issues that I have and so forth. So I've tried to be upfront about that and transparent on everything that I've been involved in. On it. And the third thing I would say is from a financial point of view, I think it was John Manley who said, and I agree, this is the stupidest economic decision I could have made in my life. And I didn't do it for I did it for public service. I want to help. I feel I can help the country. I have no interest in making money from all these, any ideas about how I'm going to somehow is foreign to me. So I am following every single rule. I want to be way far from the chalk line, if you will, and where it is. And again, you can see it with the Conflicts and Ethics Commissioner. It's how I've lived my life. It's not my objective here is I want to restore the relationship and I want to get the two Michaels out and the Schellenberg situation sorted. That's what I want to try and achieve.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. There's a number of other issues dealing with your involvement in China as with McKinsey and Group, and some of your statements about being bullish on China, on the Belt and Road project, which some have suggested is contrary to Canada's interest in the Asia Pacific region, and the notable comment about drinking the Kool-Aid about China and President Xi. Do you have any thoughts on that now, different from what you expressed so effusively into the Council of Foreign Relations and others?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. One is I'm very bullish on the growth of China. I think it's going to continue to move, the urbanization, as I went through it. Many of the comments that I made were pre-2016, and I think things have changed. You know, the world changes and where it is, and so if you'd asked me what I felt about China in 2003 and what I wrote about, what I said in 2009, what I thought about Poland and different, you know what I mean? So I do have views that I express. I don't hold them to the end of time. I put in my opening remarks. I am again amazed by the growth of where China is. I'm very concerned right now with the sort of the crackdown in terms of dissent and where things are, and I've been quite direct with the government about saying that and how I feel. So there's not I don't want to give you a sense that there's an inherent bias that everything's rosy and great, because that's not how.
Tell me, Ambassador.
Seconds, Jack?
Pardon?
30 seconds.
Yes, you mentioned human rights, and I wanted to raise another issue about McKinsey having a seminar very close to the internment camp for Uyghurs. Were you sensitive about human rights in that situation, or were you aware of it?
On that situation, I think Kevin Sneeder's come out, who's the managing partner, to apologize on that side. There was no awareness at all on the McKinsey side that there was anything going on with the detention camps, and if they had, they wouldn't have done it. So there's an apology for that actually having happened, and it wouldn't happen again. So I would say that that side, that's how I view it, and it doesn't take me away from my role as ambassador to Canada to raise direct concerns with that issue with the Chinese government.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. We're now going on to the second round, which members had 5 minutes each. Mr. Jennis.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, Mr. Barton, just to pick off what you just said to Mr. Harris, you suggested that McKinsey wasn't aware of the detention camps at the time when the corporate retreat in Kashgar happened. Is that what you said?
Mr. Chair, I did.
Okay. Because these mass detention camps were denounced by a UN committee a week before the retreat happened. Did McKinsey just kind of miss the news item, or?
Mr. Chair, if you'd like to talk about my background with McKinsey, I'm very happy to keep going on that. I'm not sure if that's what we want to do in the committee, but I'm very happy to go.
Yeah, I control the 5 minutes. I think this is very important for the public interest, sir. Because you're telling me you're not aware of a lot of things, or weren't aware of a lot of things that are pretty fundamental. You said that McKinsey had this corporate retreat completely unaware that there were concentration camps 4 miles away.
Mr. Chair, what I'm saying is that I'm not trying to absolve myself or anything. I'm saying that McKinsey apologized for that having been done. It is my understanding that they were not aware that was the case. That's what I'm saying. And again, back to some of the earlier comments that you made about the situations like the company with in the South China Sea. You're saying, McKinsey's working with them, and then implying that McKinsey's working on building things in this is just completely false.
Sir, with respect, what I said.
I just ask members to show respect and make sure that we have a chance to hear from each person, because of course we have interpreters who need to have the time to interpret.
Mr. Chair, I think the process is that I control the time, but I'll ask a question, and Mr. Barton, I'd like to hear your response to it. You have said that there was not an awareness of what was happening in these camps by McKinsey, and yet, there was news items, there were UN reports beforehand. You said you're not aware of Canada's policy in the South China Sea. My charge is never that McKinsey was physically building these installations in the South China Sea. It's that McKinsey was advising the companies and working with companies under World Bank sanctions that were, in fact, doing this. And you said you're not responsible because, there's the big company and so forth. But you set the policy direction. So, are you comfortable that all of these things were happening under policy direction that you set? Are these the things that you consider consistent with your personal values?
Mr. Chair, there's a lot to unpack in that. If I'll try and answer it. I think one, as I said, again, on the situation with the retreat and the Uyghur detentions, I'm saying that McKinsey has said they were not aware of the case. As it relates to the South China Sea, as I said, I'm going to follow what the government policy is. We basically believe we should follow what arbitration says and what they want to do. Any more detail on that, I'm going to have to get advice from where it is, but we believe in what international arbitration says. So I'm not trying to skirt the issues. I'm just trying to say that on McKinsey side, I'm happy to go into that as much as you want. I just would be careful about conflating what McKinsey was doing versus what was actually happening.
Sir, I really look forward to seeing that complete list of companies, state-owned companies that you advise. I hope you'll be able to submit those to the committee. You said at the beginning of your testimony that you commend what China is doing to try and contain the coronavirus. Part of what China is doing to contain the coronavirus is that when somebody dies of this virus, their body is taken away from the families. They're not allowed burial. They're banning Christian funerals. Are you aware of the sort of human rights abuses that are happening in the context of this so-called effort to contain the coronavirus? And do you want to qualify your initial remarks at all that you commend what China's doing in this respect?
What's going on in China right now with this is unbelievable, and I don't think we should underestimate the scale of what's happening and how the infections occurs. I've not heard anything that would suggest to me that they're doing this for religious purposes at all, but they're terrified of the spread of where this is. And I think the scale of what's going on, this is like Berlin 1948 with the airlifts getting food in there and so forth. It's an unbelievably high-scale operation. That's what I'm commending them for. Lock down a city of 11 million people to try and protect all of us from not getting infected, I think is a very worthy thing, and I commend them for that.
Thank you. Mr. Janice, Ms. Yip.
Thank you, Ambassador Barton, for coming such a long way to join us today. Part of our mandate of this committee is to review consular relations. Can you provide an update on evacuation efforts happening in Wuhan, and what are the other countries doing to evacuate their citizens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, we have, I think it's 373 Canadians that have said they want help. And we've got 211 on the flight manifest for this plane, which hopefully will leave tomorrow around noon. So that leaves a gap. And what we're looking at to help in closing that 373 to 211 is we're talking with the British and the Americans. The minister, I think, talked about that this afternoon because they've got room on planes and they're right there. So that would be the fastest way. But there's all sorts of logistics challenges. So we're looking at that carefully. And at the same time, we're looking at this second plane coming in. We've got the plane. It's ready. We just don't want to send a A380 to pick up 5 people, right? And where it is. So that's how we're working at. One of the things that's been quite important in this is the registering of Canadians. So there were only, I think it was 91 Canadians people that registered as Canadians on January the 10th in Hubei province, right? As the crisis emerged, we're now up at 500. So what we're also doing is, where are the other areas in China where we have Canadians we're registering, and where is the infection moving, and where does that, so we're not to use that tired expression about where's the puck going. That's what we're trying to figure out, where that is ahead of time, so that we know what's happening. So those are some of the things. The challenge too is the logistics on the ground. I spoke to someone this morning, a family that had traveled 250 kilometers to get to the airport, and when they got into the airport, there's no more water in the vending machines. It's cold, and we can't get our people into the airport because of the security. So it's working out those details and we need to be as responsive as we can. So that's, I don't know if that gives you enough.
Are you in discussions with the Chinese government to allow you more access for the consular officials on the ground? For example, what you just said about the water trying to get in and so forth?
They're actually, Mr. Chair, they're being very helpful. Like we raise the issue, they'll say, okay, where are they? So they actually will they're trying to help themselves as they go through it. We've really beefed up the team that's on the ground because they're very nervous about the number of people coming in. So we've added a second team to go in, and so they're being very open on it. But they have very strict controls. It's like 10 to 20 stops that people have to go through to get to the airport, and those are ones we're trying. We got to help get these people through. So we have very direct communication with them, and we found them to be quite helpful.
So there is enough staff on the ground in Wuhan, but what about, should there be other affected areas?
Well, that's why, again, we actually haven't reduced our embassy staff as much as other countries like Australia or the UK, because we want to basically have the resources to be able to deal with that. And as long as people are not afraid, and they're not, we would like to have those resources. We're also reallocating people, so we've moved people from immigration, where there's not actually a lot of activity, there's not a lot of tourists flying. We've moved them.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to cut you off so I can just ask my next question. China does not recognize dual citizenships. We know that there are Canadians who entered China with a Chinese passport, and now they are not allowed to leave Wuhan. What is being done to help these Canadian citizens, and also what is being done to help Canadian permanent residents?
Yeah.
Ambassador, I just want to ask all members to try to make sure that when a question is asked, the witness has an opportunity to answer. Of course, I think there was, but I just want to point that out. Okay. Ambassador.
Sure. Quickly, that China has quite strict rules about the consular services and how it works with permanent residents and so forth. And they do that with all countries. What we're doing is we don't want to, and they've agreed to this, we don't want to break families up, if you will, and they're being helpful on that. I've had a number of conversations, and I'm a pipsqueak in it because the team's doing it, but just to check in where you've got, a husband who's a Canadian citizen, you got a permanent resident, and then you've got a 1-year-old, and they're being breastfed. How do we? They're all going. They normally wouldn't, but they want to keep the families together. But they have a policy that we have to deal with. We're trying to push it in other cases. Is that?
Thank you, Ms. Yip. And now, Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate your service. Obviously, with service comes scrutiny from the public, including their officials, so appreciate you being here. Have you ever met with Huawei officials in your capacity as Canada's ambassador to China?
Mr. Chair, I have.
So would you mind putting on the record, who did you meet with from Huawei, and where did you meet with them, and roughly when?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what the privacy rules are, but I have had outreach from them, from some of the senior vice presidents, to talk, about, information that relates to the consular cases.
Privacy Act pertains to Canadian citizens. So
Right.
Did you meet with these officials in China?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And were they Chinese officials from Huawei, or were they Canadian ones?
They were Canadian. One was Canadian, one was Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the nature of your conversations?
Again, I'm a rookie at what's privacy or not on this sort of thing, but what I would say is that they were conversations about the relationship between Canada and China and the Hmong situation and what was happening and so forth. It was just them giving their views about what the situation was like and what was happening. And my view is I'm open to hearing ideas from and views from many different people that are in the system. It wasn't a negotiation or anything like that. It was just, here's our view about what's happening.
Did you raise the illegal detention of Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig?
Absolutely. I always do that when I have the chance, and I did.
In this case, what did any efforts come from that? Any commitments by those officials?
Again, it's unclear to me what influence the company has in China and where it is, and it's not for me to sort of figure out the detail of it. So what I expressed was that, while you may be very upset and concerned because Madam Meng has been arrested, we are very upset and concerned because Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig have been arrested, and we've had the death sentence put on Richard Schellenberg or Robert Schellenberg. So that was the nature of the discussion that went on.
Did the Huawei officials ever suggest a so-called prisoner exchange, as has been suggested by Eddie Goldenberg and applied by other senior Liberals such as John Manley and Jean Chrétien?
They did not to me.
Okay. Again, I think it's important for us to be asking, because as you said, the relationship is broken, and you talked about wires and linkages, and I think that obviously talking to the business community, among others. Sir, you mentioned earlier the position on this, your lack of knowledge of the position on the South China Sea. Obviously, that's a very important issue, geopolitical issue. It's important to trade. It's important to Canada. I'm from British Columbia, so having some certainty in those areas is very important. On July 12th of 2016, at the time, the Minister of Global Affairs, Stéphane Dion, had said that he welcomed the tribunal ruling on the Convention of the Law of the Sea by a UN body. And in it, he said, Canada therefore stands ready to contribute to initiatives that build confidence and help restore trust in the region. Ambassador, how can you stand ready for initiatives that build confidence and helps restore trust if you don't know the government's position on the South China Sea?
Okay. As I mentioned on the South China Sea, just to clarify, we respect, and I say that we would respect what international arbitration rulings are on what's happened in that case. And the international ruling is that there is a concern. ASEAN has also raised issues, and we've supported that and where it is. That's the point I would say. So I actually think I do have a view on that. I think that on maritime issues in general, the Canadian government doesn't have, we respect international arbitration and policies, but we're careful about what we talk about on the maritime side. On the South China Sea, I very much worry about trade being able to flow in through places. We care a lot about that. I know we do a lot, for example, in the Taiwan Straits, the Navy goes through there as a matter of course in what we do. So open sea routes are important.
Thank you, Mr. Albus. Mr. Oliphant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Barton, for being with us. I think it's important to note that our committee is doing some important work, and our work is meant to look at this complex, important relationship that we have with China. You've been invited here to help us. I think that some members that are subbing on the committee seem to think this is an American-style confirmation hearing. This is not. And I want to make sure that people watching this recognize that your appointment has followed due process, and everything about this appointment has been for the best interest of Canada. And I personally want to thank you for your public service and doing this. So this is not about you.
Point of order.
Mr. Dennis, point of order.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think you'd find that it's out of order for the member to imply that in a free society, tough questions to public officials are out of order.
Thank you.
It is important that in Canada,
Mr.
we are able to ask challenging questions to government
This is
appointees.
a matter of debate. Mr. Oliphant.
Thank you. I didn't name any names. I'm saying this is not about you. This is about Canada's relationship with China. And I'm no expert on China. On my trips to China, however, if I had a dime for every time Norman Bethune's name is mentioned, I would be wealthy. And it is a constant thing. On my most recent trip to China, I thought that that would help the Chinese understand the importance of the relationship. What I heard was a different thing from Chinese officials, and that was that they expected that we would then understand them better. And that it becomes a complex thing that we were talking like this. They saw an extradition process as being one thing. We saw arbitrary detention as something else. We weren't speaking the same language. Can you tell us how you're trying to pull those two vectors together to get us on common language?
Sure. Because I do think there are, as I said, from the history and the culture, different perspectives and views on the world, right? And I think that what we first tried to do is move away from what I'd call the speech reading on both sides, which literally was first, you you are lapdogs of the U.S. You've done this and that and the other. It was and why they were so upset with that, and we're saying we're following the rule of law in what we did. We have an extradition treaty and how this works, and you did see that, but part of it was because there was no discussion. It's just both talking at each other and no time for discussion. And I think what I found to be helpful, and again, we have to get results, otherwise this is activity with no impact, is to unpack it a bit and say, well, you know what, we actually have this long-standing relationship. We have, our people like each other, actually, you know what I mean? So let's go back to what we like about each other. Let's not forget that, right? And let's talk about why is that the case, and what are some of the things we did for each other in the past to just build trust and open the ears on both sides of where it is. And there are going to be different. We're never going to be singing from the same hymn book on this, right? But we can actually start to find that there's some common areas that we can work on. We have a lot of things to work on in a common agenda that are out there. And let's not, when we think about this challenge we have, let's not lose the forest for the trees. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's.
Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful.
What would give you hope?
I'm hopeful. I'm just by definition an optimistic person, so you have to take that. But I believe it's small steps, and the fact that we did not have any formal communications. It was a lot of it informal. We now have very good formal relations. We have real discussions where we can argue and debate, and let's try and figure this out and understand where things are. So there's a momentum, and I think they want to have this sorted, and we want to have this sorted. And I feel like there's a broader discussion, and there's small steps. Again, I go back to the meat and the pork, and that's not I have nothing to do with that. The Prime Minister is very nice to say that, but the part of it is that we couldn't even get to resolve the issue because of we couldn't communicate or talk. Now that we could communicate, we could actually resolve the issue. And so these things start to open up other opportunities, and those are signals or green shoots. So sorry, I see lots of green shoots.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. I'm going to go now to get the 2.5 minutes for Monsieur Bergeron and then Mr. Harris, and then after that, if members agree, we'll take a 5-minute health break. If that's all right. But let's see what members. Well, let's see what members can let me know their views on that. Monsieur Bergeron.
2.5 minutes, c'est ça?
2.5 minutes? Okay. I really don't like coming back to questions that I've already asked because I'm burning up precious time. And then I have the impression that I'm grilling you, which is not at all my intention. However, I know that you were appointed after Meng Wanzhou was arrested. Everyone is aware of this. However, to your knowledge, was the embassy contacted? Did we ask for the opinion of specialists in our relationship with China when the international group had to decide whether or not to provisionally detain Ms. Wang Zhu?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, again, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but my sense from the way it works with justice is they just decide. They make their decision. It's a case that comes through. So my sense of it was there was not any sort of broader discussion of it. That's my sense of it.
Okay. Donc, selon vous,
And so, in your opinion, you're not able to assess how the Garrett couple in 2014 was able to be taken into account of as a warning of what could happen.
Yeah. Again, my sense is that justices has quite a strict process that they deal with all of these, and so they didn't. I don't know how they looked at it. I don't think that it was more broadly discussed.
le Canada, les officiels du
Canada and officials from the Department of Foreign Affairs said many times that they're trying to get the support of a certain number of countries throughout the world in order to pressure China regarding the incarcerated Canadians. Two questions about that. First of all, is that a good lever to put pressure on Chinese authorities, or on the contrary? Is this something that might cause Chinese authorities to resist? Second question, the new Silk Road Initiative, does it not counter Canada's efforts on the international stage? Mr. Bergeron, your 2.5 minutes is up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will allow the ambassador to provide a brief response.
Enough notes on your first question again, too. Sorry about this. I'm happy to go over if you want.
Est-ce que, d'une part,
on the one hand, the strategy intended to get international support, does that not risk causing the Chinese to become more firm in their position?
To do, but it's not sufficient. It's sort of like necessary, but not sufficient. I don't think it's going to unlock it, but it's a good thing to do. The Silk Road, the Belt Road Initiative, I think, as we say, from a government point of view, there are many good aspects in the sense of the trade opening, but there's many concerning aspects about the transparency and the debt that's in the system. So, it's not black or white in where it is, and that's, I think, the view we have on it.
That's what I mean. Bergeron, Mr. Harris.
Thank you. I'll ask a quick question that's similar to Mr. Bergeron's. You were very bullish, of course, on the, as you say, on China, but also on the One Belt, One Road blueprint. And we've gone into the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the CTPP, with other countries, specifically attempt to strengthen economic ties, but not dominated by China. Do you think that your work and enthusiasm for the Chinese project runs counter to that strategy, and does that cause problems for you?
Again, I'm the ambassador to Canada, so I'm going to be pursuing what the government is saying. I think my view and my understanding what the government is saying is that we want to be very careful about certain aspects of the Belt Road Initiative. Again, the transparency and the debt, and does it beholden some of the people that are involved in it. On the other hand, there's aspects of it that are positive in terms of opening up trade, which actually benefit Canadian companies that are actually on that.
Thank you. Fair enough. One last question. It has to do with the question at the beginning, point of order. The 14 countries that support Canada, the others who say they do but won't say it loud enough for others to hear. Is there any comprehensive strategy or strategic plan in terms of working with them? We've heard nothing about task force with other countries, as we saw in the Iranian situation, and special efforts in the PMO, for example, to work with all these people in a systematic way. Is something like that going on, and would it help?
There is. There are the 14 countries, there are conversations. I mean, one of the first things I did when I got to Beijing was to thank the ambassadors in those countries for doing that and to continue that. So that continues and where it is. But as I mentioned before to the chair on the previous one, I think it's a good thing to do, but it's not going to unlock. We have to do other things in addition. So yes, it continues, but we also have to look at other means too.
It doesn't really help, is what you're saying.
No, it does. I think it definitely does, because what we don't want to do is have this. We don't want to have this happen again or to another country, and so it's in other countries' interest to also say we don't. It may be Canada now who's next on it, and so there's an interest. And the minister has actually talked even about a notion of a protocol that be put in place to try and that countries would agree to. It's just it definitely is something that we're continuing to move on, but we have to think about other things in addition.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Colleagues, we're going to add on to the end of the meeting the 5 minutes that we'll suspend for now. And I understand, Ambassador, when we come back, you'd like to correct something from earlier, and I'll give you an opportunity to do that. We'll add that time, if you don't mind, as well, to the time for the meeting. So the meeting is suspended. So I understand you don't have a statement, Mr. Ambassador. But we're still on 5 minutes. Ms. Alislev.
And thank you very much, Ambassador, for being here. It's very important that we understand more about where we need to be going. And many of the things that you have said is around deepening and broadening the relationship with China, yet at the same time promoting and defending Canada's interests. So I wonder if you could speak to that in terms of the vulnerability that we face by doing more business with China. Can you tell us what you're doing to protect us from that vulnerability?
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Chair, again, very much believe in this notion of we engage, but we're also being, we defend our interests and where we need to do both. I think on the, what we've been doing is working with industry on that side. So if you think about canola would be the classic at vulnerability on that side, such a significant portion of our canola exports going there, and then that being hit, that's a big vulnerability. And I think that what we're doing is saying, let's make sure that we have diversification and we're not putting too many eggs in one basket is one, and working with, and then also, just working with the industry to make sure that we think about how that works.
But the rule of law, and it feels to Canadians like they're not respecting the rule of law, and that they shouldn't be able to put this punishing prohibition on our exports. So diversifying will just mean that they can hold us hostage on more fronts at the same time rather than just one, but it still has a material impact, particularly if we broaden. Could you...
What I meant on that was actually, Mr. Chair, that it's not broadening within China, it's broadening in Asia. So it's not, we aren't just putting all of our eggs in one basket, first of all, in China. That's an important market. There's a very big market in Asia too, so let's make sure that we do that. Secondly, I think we have to use the rule of law. So with the canola one, where I've been quite involved, again, with the industry and the government's been involved, we went to the WTO. We went to the WTO. That's now led to discussion. So there was a hard, and then there's a discussion. And the important thing, I think, is that we do it with industry, that we're working together on that.
And how would you characterize the progress?
I think the progress is actually quite good, but let's see the result and where it is. It feels like we're in discussions. We were not having any discussions before. We are now, and involved not only the federal government, but provincial government people as well, again, with the industry. So there's actually a dialogue. There was a refusal to have a discussion before. So we're getting into that. China also needs some of these products that we're talking about. So it's moving in the right direction, but we got to get the result.
Now, clearly, we're seeing that there isn't necessarily the same kind of separation between corporations and government in the People's Republic of China like we would have in North America. And with mandated laws in China that says that corporations have to provide governments with that information, how do we mitigate that and protect and defend Canadian interests when doing business with these countries?
Right. Well, I think that when Canadian companies are doing business with Chinese companies, the Trade Commissioner's officers are very good at explaining what are the requirements, what type of joint venture agreement should you have, and being very open about how that works. I also think we need to differentiate between state-owned and the private sector and where it is. And there's a lot of noise about what's happening where. I think it's we need to spend time focused on each company and understanding the governance of that company.
But are there not a number of increasingly private corporations that have party officials on their boards, and that's an increasing trend in China?
Mr. Chair, there are reports of that are happening, that's happening, and that's why what I think is most important is look at each company individually, just like we would do it in other places, and you can understand very clearly what's happening. It's not intransparent.
It feels to Canadians like it's not very transparent. Could you advise us on why we should believe that it is transparent.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think this is the difference between being in the country and being outside of the country, and I think it's important to understand who the individuals are, what their relationships are. You can get a lot of information that way, and you can find out actually from other Chinese business leaders as well as to how they think about it. Look at the results of joint ventures. There's a lot of other businesses around the world that are interacting with companies, and there are some that don't interact with others. So that's very clear when you're there.
Thank you, Ms. Aleslev. Maintenant, Monsieur Dubourg, qui va, je comprends.
Mr. Dubourg is next, who will share his time with Ms. Yip. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellency, I left you some time to put your earpiece on, and it's done. Thank you for being here with us. First of all, I would like to express my support with my colleagues for the Bloc and the ADP that the work you're doing on the ground is very important in the current context. And I would like to extend our greetings to the 3 Canadians who are being detained. There are 123. There are those 3 who are problematic cases. But I want to ask you a few questions, and I want to say that I've reviewed your resume, and I've seen what you've done. I'd like to congratulate you for what you have accomplished. You know the situation there very well, but I would like to know if you personally, when you were contacted after McCallum left, what was your reaction? Can you tell us how your expertise and experience made you the appropriate person to play this role, even if earlier it was said that since your arrival, we've seen tension really diminish? Can you talk to us about the experience you've had that can help Canada in this situation that is somewhat difficult?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again for the messages to our detainees. That will be very well received by them next week. You know, I hope I'm understanding it correctly. I was asked to do this role before, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't feel it fit my timing and where it was. So after I was asked again, I felt there was a very significant need, and I think what I've tried to bring to it is I have experience in living in the country, relationships that have been built over time with people, and they know that I know what they're like. They know I will tell truth to power. I don't back off on that. They know my track record, and it's broad. It's not just business. It's in government. It's in the social sector. It's in universities. Probably my closest linkages are actually through the university system. And so what I've tried to do is just bring those relationships to the extent I can. And other people, there are other Canadians that also have very good relationships in China that we need to harness. And that's from the academic side, it's from the NGO side, it's from the business side. Our pension funds, for example, are very influential in where it is. So it was to try and assemble a team, if you will, and then have a plan. And I think it's the total commitment that my objective is to restore the relationship, but with those 3 parameters around it. I've been very clear all the way through, and I'm focused. And then by talking and with anyone I possibly can, it was mainly informal at first because it was difficult to have formal conversations. So I would meet people. Oh, happened to see you in the restaurant. That's interesting. To that type of discussion, to then getting to a formal basis. And again, the team we have in Beijing is very good. They have those relationships too. So that's what we've tried to do. It's building the channels to have the discussions.
D'accord, merci. Vous avez dit...
Very well, thank you. You said in your introduction that as part of your mandate, you were asked to restore this relationship and then to ensure that the 2 Michaels return here to Canada. You spoke of human rights as well. However, you did say that it was important for Canada to understand China and that China needs to understand Canada. It's true that's not part of your mandate, but what role are you going to play in that? What are the common points that you're going to rest on to ensure that this learning actually happens?
Well, I think on the China side, there's a sort of a broad understanding of that we're a resource-based country, a friendly country that's been very helpful, but making sure they understand the depth and breadth of who we are and our capabilities, I think, is one where that's the case, and why we believe in the human rights the way we do. It's one thing to say it, but why is that the case? What's our history on that front? And so it's more the whys of how this works. And so I spent time, there's actually some Canadian study centers in a number of the universities. I think, by the way, we need to fund them more because we need to have more Chinese academics writing about Canada, not Canadians writing about Canada in China. And there's appetite to it, but we support it. So those are the stories we need to get across.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Dubourg. Mr. Albus.
Thank you. Again,
Thank you, Mr. Dubourg. Mr. Albus.
you about Huawei officials and the dates, as well as the location, as well as the identity of the people that you did meet with. I'd like you to ask to submit that to the committee. Perhaps you could do it by the 14th of February. That would be acceptable time. It's important for Parliament to receive this information. I appreciate your cooperation.
Mr. Chair, on that one, I'm happy to be helpful in that. I want to be prudent in terms of the specific discussions I had, so I'm going to get some advice if I can from GAC. I'm personally comfortable. I just want to make sure I'm following the rule.
I appreciate that. Parliamentary committees do have extensive powers, but I do appreciate you being cooperative in the matter. Thank you. I'll pass it to Mr. Workington.
Thank you, Ambassador, for being here. I do want to drill down a little bit in terms of lessons learned. You did say when being advised by other countries and partners, allies, that one of the important lessons to be learned is not to be bullied. Frankly, Canadians feel like we're being bullied right now. We have the arbitrary detention of Canadian citizens. We have what seems to be arbitrary and nonsensical cutting out of our agricultural exports. You mentioned pork. It's interesting that you mentioned that you believe that the elimination of the export, allowing Canadian pork back into China was a good sign. Why did you say that?
Well, Mr. Chair, as I said, I did hear from many different embassies and countries on first of all, I just want to say about this notion of not being bullied, and I think that's standing up, and that's why the Prime Minister is not interested in doing prisoner swaps on that. That's so it's being clear we have a system, and where it is, and people say stay, you do that, and you move through it. On the agricultural, to your question,
I wasn't clear in my question. Okay. I don't think you said that it was a good sign. Most Canadians believe that it was an arbitrary decision for the Chinese simply to shut it. It was for ulterior reasons that they were shutting out Canadian pork. The Chinese have made the case that they believe that it was because of a document issue. Do you believe that it was done that the ban was lifted because of reconciliation of the documents, or do you believe that it was because they decided to show some indication of goodwill?
Mr. Chair, this is an area that I've delved into quite deeply with the industry, the Canadian Meat Council, and what I would say, the view is that there was a mistake that was made. It was not seen as a arbitrary shift. If I might just finish, the issue was then being able to try and get that so it stopped, and because there was no discussions, we then couldn't figure out how to resolve it. As the discussions moved on, then we were actually able to resolve it, and it's in China's interest, but it was stuck. It was a mistake. It was stuck, and now I think through very good efforts from the Meat Council and others in the industry, they were able to, and Ag Canada and everyone get it sorted and move.
Okay, so we have a major issue, and it's an ongoing crisis in the canola exports. Where are we at with that,
Mr. Chair?
Pardon me. Again, the vast majority of Canadians, especially Canadian farmers, believe that this is arbitrary, that this has nothing to do with canola, that this is simply retaliation for a relationship gone sideways.
Mr. Chair, first thing I'd say is anyone who knows me knows how passionate I am about the ag food industry and where it is. So I have a very strong personal interest in that because I think there's a very significant opportunity. I do think that was a punishment, if you will. They stopped it. And what's happened is, as I said, we've gone to the WTO. That has led to now what I think are some constructive discussions, technical discussions that we're having. So it's moving forward. At the end of the day, the results matter, but there's momentum.
Well, yeah, results do matter. In terms of lessons learned, you said we shouldn't be bullied. Now, you've admitted that this is definitely one example of being bullied. What other? Obviously, you've talked about WTO challenges. Those are very lengthy and very costly, and we don't have time on our side when it comes to the export in this industry. What other types of leverages do you believe that Canada has to try to break free from this punishing ban?
Well, I think that, Mr. Chair, the WTO is the actual vehicle we have for going through it. I think what we have to say is that food security matters a lot to China. And if you think about the protein demands, again, on the meat and the vegetable side, we are going to be a critical source of where that is. And if Canadian farmers are nervous, and they are, about, even on the meat side, about committing just in case something goes on, that supply is not going to come in. And so what we're doing is saying, first of all, we didn't do something else to try and get the we've gone to use the mechanisms that we have. And then we're saying, you need to be careful on the Chinese side because we are a high quality, safe food supplier. And what this does is make people very nervous about piling in behind it. And we're explaining that to them.
Thank you, Mr. Workington. Ms. Zan.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for being here. It's been extremely interesting listening to you and hearing your own perspective of what's going on in China. And I'm very glad to hear that you are a big believer in the culture as well. As somebody who's been involved with culture here in Canada, I really believe in cross-lateral talking with people, bringing in plays, ballets, things like this. So thank you for your efforts. I do want to talk about, in 2019, in December, there was an editorial by the current and former presidents of the International Crisis Group who said the following about their colleague, Mr. Kovrig. They said, although China has never spelled out the reason for Michael's imprisonment, it's clear he's merely a pawn in the larger geopolitical game. And at the same time, they cautioned against the adoption of, and I quote, a far more aggressive approach toward China, and noted that, quote, Beijing has a critical role to play not only in its own Asian neighborhood, but elsewhere as well, including in preventing, mitigating, and resolving deadly conflict across the globe, from Central Asia to the Korean Peninsula, from Afghanistan to Venezuela, and from Sudan to Zimbabwe. So, as ambassador, can you please explain to us why engagement is the best approach to managing bilateral and multilateral relations with China?
Quick things. I'm glad on the cultural side, I think we always underestimate that. And I can't tell you the number of people in the film industry, arts, music that are doing things. And those are, again, important for the relationship. I think, again, precisely because China is playing a bigger role in the world, we need to engage with them in areas. And one, if you think about Africa, or you think about peacekeeping, you think about disaster relief, there's a lot of interest that the Chinese Red Cross has with the Canadian Red Cross because of our capabilities. They're impressed with how we do it. It's on disaster relief. And as we have, unfortunately, more disasters in the world, looking at how countries cooperate, they have a lot of resources, we have a lot of capabilities. There are many areas where we can do things together. And even with this coronavirus and pandemics, we as a country have a real depth in understanding how those work. And I think there's opportunities to collaborate. And that's, I think, what I'd say.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed that the Chinese officials had thanked Canada for the way we have reacted to the coronavirus and that we have not reacted in the same way as the United States, for instance, or Australia. And that, again, shows, I believe, this cooperation, a spirit of cooperation, which is so important in this global world. In a 2017 speech to Universities Canada, you described 3 global shifts that are underway right now. An economic power shift from the West to primarily Asia, but also to Africa, primarily Nigeria. The technical revolution, for instance, computing power, connectedness, big data, and artificial intelligence, and the need for a new societal deal that would address such economic forces as automation, which we all know is going to be a big thing in the future. So would you say still that the economic power is continuing to shift from Western countries to those in Asia? And what key forces are driving China's economic rise, and are those forces sustainable?
I very much believe in that economic power shift. As I said, we're 15 years in, and we've got, a long period to go, and it's driven by a combination of population, the young population, a huge middle class, so well over 1.5 billion new middle class coming into the system. And so in a sense, it's a re-rise of this part of the world. So I think it is, and it's driven by urbanization. China has a long way to go on urbanization and a shift in the economy to the service sector. And that's happening in other parts, Vietnam, it's happening in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and as I mentioned, Nigeria, East Africa, and these represent opportunities for Canada, and we have a good reputation because of our standards and how we do human rights, how we follow the law. We're highly respected. We just need to get out there.
And you have 15 seconds for final comment.
One thing I just wanted to note, you did note about the aging population, and that is becoming a problem in China, just as it is in Japan, Nova Scotia. How does that play into this economic rise?
In three or four words, Ambassador.
It's going to, the world is aging. We're all going to have to deal with this. We can learn from each other.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zan. Avant que nous continuons,
Before we continue, I want to say that we started the meeting at 5:35. Our break took about 10 minutes. We're going to continue up until 7:45. Mr. Bergeron, you have a few minutes. Too generous, Mr. Chair. When the Prime Minister publicly insisted on the fact that he was expecting an intervention from the United States for the liberation of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, an official from Foreign Affairs in China responded by saying, don't try to put pressure on China through a third party. And yet, the Department of Foreign Affairs has repeated, as you did recently, that this is a good strategy, which is to go and get support from other countries. From the time that we know that China is taking umbrage with this type of maneuver, how can we be sure that this is a positive strategy in order to see a positive change in the situation?
Chair, that's a very interesting question. I think that we do have a triangle here with, China, Canada, and the United States. And we know lots of trade tensions that are going on between China and the U.S. There's lots of different views within the U.S. administration as to whether is it a trade deal or do we keep China. There's lots of issues going on, and we're caught up because we're an ally of the United States, and we're also, want to trade and do things with China. And my view is we have to recognize a reality that there is those dimensions that are happening together that we have to factor in. And I think we will talk to the United States about this, and I think we have to be clear about it. I think what China reacts to most negatively, if it's a finger wagging, but with nothing else, that's not that helpful, right? And that's their sense of it, right? I think what we've got to say again as we're thinking about this whole situation is there are three parties that are involved, and the Prime Minister has been quite vocal with the President, saying, we've followed the rule of law and this extradition. So what are you doing on this side? It's not saying do X, Y. It's what are you doing about it? And I think that's a healthy thing.
Comme je le disais, nous aurons l'occasion.
As I was saying, we'll have the opportunity. I'm sorry, that's the end of your 2.5 minutes. Pardon me. Can I ask the question? No, it's my fault. I'm sorry. You should recognize that there was a mistake and let me continue. Sorry, Mr. Harris.
Chair, these times are not long enough to have a full discussion. Hopefully you can get you come back. We're obviously here interested in making sure everything is being done that can be done with respect to the detainees, but also we were concerned about the overall relationship. Are there levers that we aren't using that could be used? Have you discovered any new ones since you've become ambassador?
Mr. Chair, I'm interested in ideas from the committee, by the way, because I think we have to be creative while recognizing we have a rule of law in where it is, and not being bullied. But I think there is room for creativity, and I think that one, as I said, the international pressure it's a good part of it. We need to keep that up for the long term and where it is. I think we need to look at what we're in terms of discussions with China to say there's so much more that we could do together. Why is this getting in our way? And to frame that up so that it's one thing to say it. What does that look like and where it is? It's working with the United States. So I think there are areas, and we're going to have some creativity within the system that we are, and that's where when you start discussing things with people, I think ideas can come up.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the question of bullying as a tactic or as a fact of life, perhaps, in some international relations. We've seen it with the American administration in some cases. I won't go into detail. But, what disturbs me that when we're told that there are 14 countries who are on our side and are willing to say so, but there are an unknown number, perhaps a large number, who aren't. And so they're not willing to say so, obviously out of some sort of fear of repercussions or retaliation or some sort of bullying. I find that worrisome as a citizen of the world, and there are a lot of countries in the world, and so I'd like to see the list, so see how many are there but not really there. What do we do about that? Is there something that tells us what we need to do?
I think it's a very good point. I mean, one thing that I was surprised about is this is an important area to do things. I also have a feeling, I'm just going to say that, is that I also feel a bit like we're alone in the world. So the good news is there are 14 people that would come out. There are other countries that, not for bullying reasons, it's just their culture and approach. They don't say anything about anyone, and we can push them and drive them. It's not to do with China. They don't do it. They don't talk about the United States. It's just the way they are. But all I'm saying is I as someone coming into this, thought this would be an obvious area. It was surprising to me too, where it is. I do think there's things that we can do on that, because in a world that's changing so quickly, we have to think about working together. All the foundations are changing, the multilateral foundation. So I think we should invest in that, because there is areas for cooperation. But I too have been surprised at a number of places that are not interested in it, and interesting not because of bullying, it's just not what they want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Colleagues, as I indicated, we can go until 7:45. I understand that Mr. Manley would like to ask for agreement for him to be permitted to ask a question. Mr. Manley, you want to maybe make your request?
Yeah, I would. If the committee agrees, I'd like to just take a short opportunity to say something and ask a question.
Is it agreed?
Mr. Chair, I have no objection, but can I ask, the ambassador did say, I think, that he had some flexibility in terms of time. Could we, in light of Mr. Manley's desire, and I think could we extend till 8 o'clock maybe?
Apparently, there's not agreement to do that.
Okay. Well, either way,
But I guess there was agreement to let Mr. Manley
Yeah.
ask a question. So, Mr. Manley, I'll let you go ahead, and then we'll come back to the list. Is that all right? Mr. Manley.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I want to echo some of the things I've heard from other members here. I'm not going to belabor these points, but your relationship to McKinsey, the 22 of the 100 top state-owned corporations, your relationship to Tech Resources and the investment, the Chinese Investment Corp, and these conflicts of interest. My question is related to, I just wanted to put those concerns on the record, but my question is related to this position that we're in between the United States and China with Huawei and with 5G, and how you see this unfolding, how we're going to maneuver through this situation with the Five Eyes and the demands by the Americans that we not take on Huawei technology for implementing 5G.
Right. The 5G question is clearly a critical question. There are a lot of security issues that are going to be dealt with in that. I'm not part of that conversation. We've got people in the government that are looking at that file and moving it through. But so I think it's an important decision that's going to be made. Again, I'm not party to those discussions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manley. Mr. Jenis, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellency, could you share a little bit about your engagement on the Chalil case?
On the what?
The Chalil case.
Chalil?
That's the name of a Canadian detained in China?
Sorry. Yes, who's been in detention for about 15 years.
Yes.
I've looked into that case, and Hussein, I call him Hussein, has basically, because he's not a Canadian citizenship, we are not allowed to provide, we aren't able to get access to him on our consular services side. We've tried, and because he's someone I would like to see. I know it's been a standing file, but
yeah, Mr. Chalil actually is a Canadian citizen. So my next question was, does the government of Canada support calls for universal suffrage in Hong Kong?
Two things I would just say on that. On the case of Hussein, what I'd say is we have tried everything we can, and we do not have access on the consular services side. We've tried. If you have ideas of how to do it, I'm open for that. On Hong Kong, we support the one country, two system model on that, and so we believe that people should have the right to be able to express their views and where they are. We're hopeful for a peaceful resolution of that, but we believe very much in the one country, two systems approach.
My question was, do you support calls for universal suffrage in Hong Kong?
My response is we support the one country, two systems model. There's very clear rules about what can be done and not done, and that's the approach that we take.
Thank you, sir. I think your answer is clear. Do you regard... You used the word friend. You said friends disagree with respect to China, the Chinese government. I'm curious, principally, do you regard the Chinese government as a strategic friend, as a strategic competitor or foe, as something else?
As I mentioned, Mr. Chair, China is a very complex place. And so I think to try and paint them as black or white is not appropriate. I think that there are parts of what China does where we have a very strong common interest in what we want to do in advancing an agenda, and there are parts of what China does that we fundamentally disagree with, but it's not black or white.
Thank you for providing your views on that. You spoke during the introduction about cultural, philosophical differences. You talked about how we have to understand history and culture, and that China's political differences, in your view, may be rooted in Confucian values of collectivism, unity, and harmony. My reading of founding texts of Confucianism is that they're very much at odds with the typical practices of the current Chinese government. And I would maybe make the argument, it was the politics of the Marxist powers in China to try and destroy China's Confucian history. In places like Hong Kong and Taiwan, that history was not destroyed. Now today, Taiwan is a well-functioning democracy rooted very much in China's history and values. Hong Kong is a place where there are strong calls for universal suffrage democracy, which I would hope Canadians would support. It seems to me that the political structures of China are predominantly rooted not in sort of long-standing Confucian values, but in the political philosophy of Marxism and totalitarian control. But I'd love to hear you sort of defend your view on that. Or, I mean, are we agreeing maybe somewhat, or what do you think about that thesis?
Mr. Chair, I don't think we're agreeing. I think
Okay.
that my understanding of Chinese history, and I said we all should spend time really understanding what's happening there, is that Confucianism is very much a part of the system and how it's working today. There's different manifestations of that, and that's in mainland China. It's not just Hong Kong and Taiwan. And that's rooted, as I said, in the notion of harmony and the collective good as opposed to the individual. It's a view that is in that system. There are many other dimensions, too, that I think that are worth looking at on that front. It doesn't mean that we have to agree. We just need to recognize
Ask
that.
a quick follow-up question before time runs out. You would agree that those values are completely compatible with freedom and democracy and with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as we've seen in places like Taiwan. Would you agree?
You packed a lot into that question. But Mr. Chair, I'll try and answer it. What I would say is there are some elements of collectivism and harmony are actually at odds with the individual rights. They're different.
Thank you, Mr. Genis. Mr. Fragiskatos.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've met now tonight, Mr. Barton, for close to 2 hours, 2 hours plus. You've answered a number of questions on a number of different topics. I see we're approaching very shortly now the end of this meeting. Is there a message, a key message that you would like to communicate, not just to us, we've been here tonight, but to those Canadians that are following this issue, the Canada-Chinese relationship very closely and are concerned about it? Is there something you'd like to really put forward as your main message to them?
The main message I would have is that China is a complex country and a society which represents very significant opportunities for us. A lot of our prosperity can benefit from being part of it, but there are also some things that we don't agree with and don't like. And whatever your view is, we're going to have to engage with China. I'm of the view that we can make that work. But we are going to have to raise our game as a society and over time. And I hope it's more of a long-term approach. Again, when I see how other countries are dealing with this, when they're struggling with a shift with China and the United States and so forth, we're seeing a more long-term, consistent approach, which can again be accelerator and brakes at the same time. And that's what I would hope is that we're not seeing this as a black and white model.
I am going to be splitting my time, Mr. Chair, with Ms. Yip, but as a last question, when you come to the conclusion of your appointment, whenever that might be, what will success look like in your view?
Success will be, in my view, defined as the following. That I want Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig released and back in Canada, and I want the death sentence taken away from Robert Schellenberg. That is the fundamental point of what I would see.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll share my time, as I said, with Ms. Yip.
There are 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong. What are your thoughts on the Hong Kong protests and its impact on Canada?
Well, Mr. Chair, to your exact point, 300,000 Canadians that are there that we have to care about what happens to them. So it's a high area of focus for us. I think that I hope that people are listening to some of the messages that are being given by the protesters, right? And it's a broad range of messages. It also relates to income inequality and lack of opportunity and so forth that's there. So I hope that there can be a peaceful way of those issues being raised. I think the elections that occurred recently were a manifestation of that. It was a process where messages were delivered, and I think the Chinese government has not intervened or pushed through. I don't think that's what they wanted or expected, but they recognize that that's where the people are. And so I think it's a delicate balance of hoping that ideas and people's expression can be put through, and that they can get to a sort of a peaceful place in it, because it's harmful for everyone in the current course.
Do you feel that the coronavirus has muted some of these issues at all in Hong Kong?
I think the coronavirus has changed the focus on a lot of things for the short term. I think the coronavirus is probably going to be here longer than we think. So I wouldn't get the idea that we're going to be done in March. I just don't believe that. I'm not a virologist, so you should be careful who you're listening to on that. But I just think this is going to take longer. But that said, these issues are not going to go away in the world, and that's why I think we have to keep moving. And obviously this is a big issue now, but we have to keep moving on all the other agenda items too.
Some constituents have told me they are scared and worried about loved ones in China, and also about the coronavirus spreading to Canada. What assurances can you give Canadians? Is there anything with your discussions with the Chinese government that could ease their minds or give them some peace of mind?
Well, first thing I'd say, if there's any country that I'd want to have to deal with a big crisis like that, it's them, in the sense of the scale of what's they don't want it released to move out of the system at all, and they're willing, again, when you see in the lockdown that's going on in Hubei province and Wuhan, it's simply extraordinary in terms of what and even in other cities that are not affected, in Beijing, you can land a 747 on the third ring road right now. People are focused and moving it. So I just would say that the effort that China is doing to contain this is extraordinary in where it is, and the World Health Organization has said that, and you see it. I think on the Canadian side, I'd also feel good because there's a lot of learnings from the SARS issue in terms of how communications occurred, what we know between the provinces and the federal government. So I think this is an area of incredible strength for Canada, this whole field. It's why China is actually asking for our help. It's not just the masks and the garments. They want virologists. They want access to our medical capability and advice in terms of how this goes. So I think the government's being very transparent, open. It's very intense, the discussions about where things are. I know we have, I think, 5 cases. I mean, again, I think we also were going to extraordinary lengths, and we're being very evidence-based on this. It's very scientific and evidence-based, and that's key.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yip. And now we'll go to Mr. Albus for 3 minutes, which will take us to the end of our time. Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. Just quickly on Huawei, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair has suggested that security concerns will no longer be the only thing the government considers. To me, that means they will be considering things other than security. So that could be political. Have you? Would you be involved in any decision regarding that? Would you be advising Bill Blair or the government in your capacity as to what the political issues would be of denying Huawei access to our 5G?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned before, I'm not involved. As I mentioned, on the technical side, I'm the wrong person. You need to have people who really understand the technology, and it's not my area. And on the political, so we have I think the Canadian government has the right people looking at the 5G and the security issues that can actually address that. On the political side, I'm not. This is a decision that's going to have to be made, and whichever way it goes, there'll be consequences, and I'll have to live with whatever the consequences are. I'm not involved.
I think all of us would live with consequences, Ambassador. Earlier, you mentioned to the committee that obviously Canadian values are very important to you, and that you would defend universal and inalienable human rights. Yet, when MP Genuis had asked you in regards to universal suffrage in Hong Kong, you replied back that the government believes in one country, two systems as the response. How are the two consistent?
Mr. Chair, what I would say was this, is that, we have relationships with different countries in what we do, and we as a government subscribe to the model of one country, two systems, and where it is. And so
the protests and the response by the authorities in Hong Kong to take democratic protesters expressing their will or their want to maintain their system of two systems and to be treated like that, you must admit there is a concern regarding human rights and violation of their rights.
Again, we follow the one country, two systems model. We are concerned and want to enable people to be able to protest and be able to share their views and where they have. And I think we've been very open about that. We want it and hope that they come to some peaceful resolution and where it is. But it's one country, two systems. We want people to express their views and not have that stopped. And we've said that.
You mentioned coronavirus may be around longer than we think. You've also mentioned we have 650 people in Greater China, which I would assume would also include Taiwan. Should Taiwan be included in international forums like the World Health Organization and International Civil Aviation Organization? Do you believe that would be helpful?
Yeah. So again, we have the one China policy that we follow. I think that on issues like health, pandemics and so forth that are affecting other people, we encourage the participation of all people that would be affected in it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albus. Thank you very much, Ambassador and Mr. Style, for appearing today. I think that we would all agree that we would like you to take our best wishes to Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spavor, who we hope to see home soon, and also our best wishes to Mr. Schellenberg. And thank you for your work. And Mr. Chalil and Mr. Genis adds. Thank you. Indeed. Thank you so much. Colleagues, the Global Affairs has informed me that Mr. Harris's issue has been addressed in the information package which the clerk received earlier today, and which will be distributed in the morning. So we can look forward to seeing that. Remind colleagues that there's a subcommittee meeting tomorrow morning from 11 till 12 at 225A West Block, and that we've had, I think, 4 responses to a survey that was sent to members. So I encourage members, if you have a moment tonight, to respond to the survey that the clerk sent you. Thank you, colleagues. This meeting is adjourned.